Oh, okay. All right, guys and gals. Here we go. Guys and gals. Hi, hashtag guys and gals.
Well, now you're talking about mature men and then an immature woman as in a girl. So
men and women. Here we are. Hashtag men and women.
Now, why you gotta say men first? You see what I'm saying? Why you gotta say
human
men
beings?
First?
If that's not referencing animals, am I?
well,
Homo sapiens.
Sexism,
Yeah.
man, sexism.
Okay, Homo sapiens.
For my peoples one time.
What up, what up, what up? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Across the Intersection podcast. This is AJ. We in here. We got the full cast of characters today. I got Avery, Eve, and Dan.
Hey, everybody.
What's up?
What's going on? We thank you for listening to us this week. We got a full slate of salacious information. And it's been a few weeks since we recorded. You know, we had the Thanksgiving holiday for those of you who celebrate the slaughter of indigenous people.
Or thanks-taking, as some people call it.
Yeah, thanks-taking. There you go. That's a good one. So I was out of town last week. Was up in NY with some family. By the way, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the above. We are at Across This on Twitter. Across the Intersection on Facebook. Please follow us, like us, shake our hands, say hello. You can listen to our illustrious podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, the streets, wherever you want to hear it. You'll hear my lovely voice. And please follow us individually on social media. I am at Divenomous, DIVENOMOUS. That's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Even I don't do nothing really on Instagram. I got like 100 people follow. I don't do nothing on Instagram.
You can check
follow Dan on Twitter.
I
Not
still
yet.
don't have Twitter. You can check me out on Diary of a Redeemed Sinner at WordPress.com, or just hit me up on Facebook, Daniel Unger.
And this is Eve. You can catch me on, what am I on Twitter? E to the V to the E. Yeah, that's it. No. Am I E to the V to the E?
I sure hope so. That's who I follow on.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me, where I talk about on Twitter everything that I can think about.
Yeah, and this is Avery. I'm on Twitter at A Very Good Idea.
So, yeah. Anyway, so as I was saying about Thanksgiving, I'm just taking Eve's term there. Was up in NY visiting the family, so you know we didn't have much podcasting going on last week. I was up in Long Island. Let's see, I was in Long Island, was in Queens, was in the Bronx. Yeah, so that's what I was doing last week. How was your Thanksgiving? I'm a hashtag Thanksgiving, by the way.
By the way, it doesn't start with me. When I was growing up, you know, New York in the 80s and 90s, like we came up with all the, you know, we had all kinds of terms because that was sort of a revolutionary era for our generation. So yeah, Thanksgiving comes from someplace else. But before Thanksgiving, I was blessed to have my vacation in the great island off of the coast of South America known as Curacao. And we just had a wonderful time. The water was perfect.
I saw those pictures, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Water was perfect. Going down and helmet diving on the sea, on the floor of the Caribbean Sea was perfect.
Nice.
You know, the salt content in the water that allows you to tread for 2 hours straight was working. So,
nice.
Yeah, it was just a great... Vacations are very important, actually.
Yeah.
It's been a few years since I've taken a real one, and I'm realizing this has to be a part of the rotation.
Nice. Yeah, no, I remember when I went one time to the Caribbean and I did scuba diving. It was amazing. Yeah. It was amazing. You guys, y'all Thanksgiving must have not been as nice as Curacao.
Not quite. We just had a small thing at our house with me, my wife, my son, her mother, and sister, and then went over to my sister's house where my side of the family was.
Nice.
So do you guys do pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie?
If you didn't know, that's the white question, Dan.
We didn't have either. So.
There you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, because squash does not belong in a pie. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Next.
Squash.
Well, holidays are typically challenging for me. I am still still trying to reconfigure and work on I guess, my belief system and what it is that I feel necessary to celebrate.
Right.
The term holiday means holy day if you get specific. And so this conflation between things that are holy and things that are national can be very difficult for someone of my composition and experience. So with that said, I did spend some time with family and friends, and went over a friend's house, had a good time, and just spent some time working on some things that weekend.
Nice.
And yeah, here we are.
Cool.
Yeah. So hashtag thanks taken, and in light of what Ava just said, yeah, sometimes it's we joke and say things like thanks taken, but you gotta sometimes. I remember when it wasn't until we started to teach our children, because I said it before, we homeschool our children, and so one of the things that homeschooling forces you to do is like you gotta study. And so it wasn't until like I started teaching my own children about things like Thanksgiving, you really see the real history, because they don't teach you that in school, right? So when you go and do your own research and you're like, wow, like really? Like, well, okay. And so one of the things my wife and I have done since our children were little, we have told them the truth. We've told them the truth about things like Thanksgiving, and I tell them the truth about Christmas. Like, this is not when Jesus was born. This is just what people have decided to observe his birthday. But if you look at the calendar, he wasn't born in the winter. Like, I mean, we went in, and so that's just, but that was like us doing our own kind of research.
That was you guys being parents, yeah. And the reality is,
the reality
is parents are the first teachers.
Right.
And a lot of times when people say, I didn't learn this in school, I didn't learn that at school, there are certain things that parents are supposed to teach. School, especially public schools, are a part of a government system.
Yeah.
And they're created to make citizens appropriate to what that government wants to put out every generation. Boom. So obviously, if you're a parent, that's the teaching and learning process should be facilitated by them. And not only that, the school system should just be one of their resources anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Carter G. Woodson says that there are two educations that a man receives. The first is the one that he's given, and the second is the one that he gives himself. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very important, what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, guys, so we got a lot on the slate this week to chit-chat about. And
that's kind of sexist. I don't know if you picked that up.
What you just said?
Yeah, you said, yeah, guys. The second time you said that. and I know that I said that Carter G. Woodson says that it's two educations that a man receives. Mm-hmm. And when I say man, I'm using man as in mankind. Mm-hmm. But I know that can be misconstrued to think man and man only and woman are men and all of that. Nonetheless, you guys, you said that twice, man. It's kind of sexist. What's going on?
I think even
I'm about to lose my media empire here.
I think even in Spanish culture, like if there's a group of people like boys and girls, you kind of use the male pronoun. So it's not just American culture. There's just different cultures use that too. That if it's like several male and a few female, they'll use the male term above the female term.
Oh, okay. All right, guys and gals. Here we go. Guys and gals. Hashtag guys and gals.
Well, now you're talking about mature men and then an immature woman as in a girl. So
men and women. Here we are. Hashtag men and women.
Now, why you gotta say men first? You see what I'm saying? Why you gotta say
human
men
beings?
First?
If that's not referencing animals,
Homo sapiens.
Sexism,
yeah.
Man, sexism.
Okay, Homo sapiens.
Sapiens.
Oh, but what about the Neanderthal? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so Homo sapiens. Here we go. We're gonna get into it. I'm gonna respect my brother's wishes here. I'm gonna reference Homo sapiens. I can't even say that without
because I think about Homo erectus and Homo.
Exactly.
Well, historically,
like in the chart that shows how people have developed, supposedly, just comes to mind when Homo sapiens comes to mind.
Well, since we're talking about it, historically, Caucasians and Neanderthals made it, right? Ooh. Did you know that? Dan, did you know that?
That they made that chart?
No, they made it.
Oh, they made it.
Yeah, made it.
I heard about
DNA.
That.
Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Oh wow.
Yeah. Science.
You got that from Neil deGrasse Tyson message.
That's all right.
I was listening to that, George. She was like, "Don't you say nothing about no Neil deGrasse Tyson." It's hilarious. But anyway, so speaking of things of that nature for Homo sapiens,
I'm like 12% English, by the way. Well,
Oh, you took
it's
your
less
DNA
than
test?
that. Yeah, but it's less than that because
the 23andMe joint.
Nah, man.
did
Ancestry.com.
Oh, Ancestry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Likewise.
Yeah, but I only did a quarter of the way through. By the way,
Why you say it all like that? What's wrong with 23andMe?
because I'm saying support AfricanAncestry.com for all those people that are have interested in that and want to know where you are as far as like the continent of Africa. They have a much bigger, much more stratified database as opposed to Ancestry.com, which has a much more stratified database when it comes to Europe.
Oh, no, I definitely
So,
want to do
yeah.
African ancestry. I did Ancestry.com. I'm very proud to say that I'm 79% West African. So that's
Nice.
How many how
So-
many lines did you do though? One
Well-
line or four?
with Ancestry.com. They must have changed it since I did it because I don't remember that question being asked. But what I was going to tell you is that I want to do the African ancestry one. It's just that when I have a few $100s for the male side and a few hundred for the female side, then I will do the African ancestry one.
With Ancestry.com, how many tests did you do either yourself or with your family?
I just did one test, and then I know that they do updates of information.
So-
and I only saw 2 updates, and to the point where they actually told me what kingdom the majority of my African ancestry came from, which is Dahomey, by the way. Dahomey represent.
Well, the way the way it works for its most accurate representation is to do both sets of grandparents. So that tends to require
Yeah, they
I think
must have
about
changed it.
no, well, it's like it has to do with like your Y, like XY chromosome or whatever. But so I know I only did one test. So obviously the percentages change the more information you get back. So
I'm gonna look it over because when
'cause
when
it's
I
like
did it, they
just
just
your-
asked for the cheek swab, and so
Yeah,
that's
so
been a few years.
that goes through your mother's line. So now and then to get the full thing, you want to track your mother's father's line
And then my father's
exactly
father's father, yeah.
and your father's mother. Right, exactly.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I haven't done that yet, but that's something that I do want to do. Ancestry.com. I just haven't gotten around to it. So speaking about Homo sapiens who are from the West African region of the world, yeah, I love that segue. I'm a master of that. So there was an article written. I guess it was probably let me see what the date here because it's not new because we haven't had a podcast in a few weeks, guys. So I'll just say recent. It's by a gentleman named Daryl Harrison. He's a writer, podcaster. He's part of the Bar Network. B.A.R.
I didn't realize there was more than one Black Reform Network, but it turns out that there is.
Yeah, these guys are out of Carolina. These guys are based in Carolina, not the old Reformed African American.
Yeah,
network,
that they changed the name for.
to the Witness guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, these guys. So they have a website and they have a couple of different podcasts. They have like the Bar podcast and this other one called Just Thinking. And so this was from the Just Thinking side of their group or whatever, their organization. But he wrote an article recently asking the question, is the message of the kingdom, is the gospel, is it enough anymore for Black Christians? Is that enough for believers who happen to be Black, right? And in it, he makes reference to a lot of different things. Obviously, we're in a heightened era of social justice and police brutality and systematic oppression. People are just becoming more aware to it, I should say. It's always been here, but in an era of social media and, information being spread instantaneously, a lot more people are being made cognizant of it, or being made cognizant to it, I should say. And so what he writes in his article is, is the gospel enough anymore? As a Christian who happens to be Black, as someone who believes in God, whatever you want to, call it, do I find more solace in following like a secular humanist, right, who just happens to be Black, more than I do in aligning myself with someone? And that goes both ways, right? Do white Christians find more solace in aligning themselves with someone who just happens to, fall in line with their cultural ideology? And we dove into that a lot last month, but this one is, I guess, the other side of that coin. for a black Christian, do I find more comfort, right? Do I find more commonality or camaraderie in someone who is a professed, humanist, right? A professed secular humanist, who does not have the same agenda or the same goal as I do, than someone who is a believer, whose desire is to see the kingdom of Jesus Christ, right, preached in the earth. Is that enough anymore?
Just sounds like a false dichotomy, though. It assumes that it's okay to just have motives in the first place instead of being a seeker of truth. The next problem is that it does not necessarily define this gospel that he's talking about. Third of all, it doesn't necessarily define the kingdom. Some people will just limit the gospel to salvation or fire insurance instead of what Jesus did, which is organically describe this kingdom that was at hand, which is a lifestyle, which is a city coming out of heaven and landing on earth, and this is how you live there.
Right.
And so that's the first issue, is those types of things need to be defined. And then the second issue is why do we assume that it has to be one or the other? If you get truth from a person who claims secular humanism, but the person is bringing some kind of critical thought, there's nothing wrong with listening to that. And then and on the other hand, if a person who claims to be a Christian has a very limited view culturally, then why should you just listen to that person based on them saying, I am a Christian?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Of course, I haven't read the article, and I can't say if it's assuming that one way or the other. But I think human nature, we often tend to go to extremes, one level or the next level. I know we've talked a lot on this podcast about, what the gospel is, and that it's not just, as Eva said, fire insurance, ticket into to heaven, but it is a lifestyle. It is the kingdom of God. It is not just in heaven, but it's here. It's now, and that the gospel does include social justice. So it's not a only or, but it should be both. But I guess the question is, though, as far as us as human beings, I know, as AJ said, we've hit a lot on kind of the white side of it, as far as the white evangelicalism and a trend where they seem to be more in line with, politically with the Republican Party, whatever the Republican Party says or their candidate, they're going to go in line with them rather than the scripture, rather than the gospel.
Right. So
oftentimes we do, as humans, we do tend to have these dividing lines based on, our culture or ideology, which is not necessarily biblical and oftentimes opposed to what the Bible says. So I believe that it can go both ways, not just on the, as we've addressed the white side of things, but also in the African American church as well, that there can be issues there as well as them, siding with, the particular ideology rather than having a balanced approach.
I agree with Eva, what she said. I thought that was very poignant. And I'd also like to add on that in light of that article or that dichotomy, there tends to be this idea that if one comes to accept through their own research that, let's say, the Earth is 13 billion years old, like an estimate through math, right? Same math that we use to add things up. Same math takes us all the way back through physics and all of that. 13 billion years, right? Then there's this idea that, that challenges what the Bible says. If we doesn't actually say it, but if we add up the years, it goes back to approximately 6,000. Well, it wouldn't be approximate because you can add it up, like 6,000 or so years, right? So young Earth theory versus old Earth theory essentially is what it is. So there's this idea that, so if I through math say, you know what, I'm gonna rock with the 13 billion years, then I must not understand. Like I must not understand that there's a spiritual realm.
Right.
That I must not understand of the possibility of the biblical narrative and all that it means as far as the Messiah, as far as those who say Jesus the Christ or Yeshua HaMashiach or whatever like that. Well, you must not be able to understand or comprehend any of those things, and I actually challenge that.
Right.
I challenge that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say like there's a false dichotomy where it's like, well, you have to follow one person or the next, and that gets into the whole labelism that and the categorization of our American culture that we just love to do. Mm-hmm. And Black Americans are Americans. Right. So I would is the gospel enough to answer this person's question if he wants to throw that out there? I would say this. I would say that in order to understand the solution, one has to understand the depths of the problem that's at hand. Now, in the end, you may still get to the same solution that somebody just gave you off break without having to do all the research and history, but you won't understand its value. Yep. You won't understand its importance. Yeah. And so I would say that no, it's not enough. I think that ultimately, a change of heart and a change of mind, and the belief in us being healed by Elohim, I think is very important. I do, and I think that's ultimately the only key to the solution. Yeah. However, I think that to say that if Black Christians is the gospel enough, clearly it's not, because look where we are. Right. So
the way the question has been asked by people in the past, I don't know about this man's heart, but it's been pretty cruel.
It is
because you're coming across a historically oppressed people group. Who on this continent, we're not even talking about the rest of the hemisphere, which by the way, when I was in Curacao a couple of weeks ago, I mean, oh my gosh, I've never been in an environment where you see so much of the impact of the transatlantic slave trade. You look at one person, they speak Dutch, another person speak Papiamentu, another person speaks Spanish. You basically saw the diaspora on that one island. But anyway, it's kind of cruel to look at a group of people and then say, well, I know what you've been through and I know the current reverberations, but do you love Jesus? Do you really love him? Because if you do, you should just be talking about him. Get over yourself.
Which is exactly what missionaries did. That was exactly what missionaries did. Signed, sealed, and delivered. Sent on the, on the ships and into conquering lands to bless the land. And they
definitely.
And it also ignores who Jesus or who Yahweh Shai or whoever the Messiah was. Yeah. He's walking around. He's a woodworker. He's walking around collecting disciples, and then talking about things related to social justice, living in an oppressive system. So he addressed these issues. So to look at people and say, how about Jesus? They should look back and say, how about him?
Yeah, and I guess I'll be somewhat of a dissenting voice. I will say that the gospel is enough because the gospel does include social justice. It's not limited to... Again, as I said, it's not limited to fire insurance. When sharing the gospel, as Eve even pointed out, Jesus was, he was aware of people's situations. He would connect with them. So it's not just simply preaching Jesus and that's it. That's not the gospel. That may be our, Americanized version of it. But that's not the whole. The whole gospel includes social justice, includes caring for the whole person, not just the fire insurance, and not just getting them into heaven. But it does include how they're doing now, caring for them now, caring for the orphan and widow. This is in the gospel.
No, you're exactly right. I think what you guys have said, Avery, Eve, and Dan. You Homo sapiens have said, thank you. Hashtag Homo sapiens. Is that the answer to, because as I read the whole article, like I told you guys in the pre-production meeting, was that after I read the article, I did some research on the guy himself, and I realized, okay, the ilk that he's coming from. So he has an agenda, and so he does ask the question in a particular way to try to pose that dichotomy, to try to throw it out there. But when you answer the question with a question, you can sort of, unravel that straw man argument, right? Because the response that I would give to that question is, what gospel are you preaching? Because if you're preaching the full gospel, then yes, it is enough, to Dan's point. But the problem is the majority of churches don't do that. The majority of churches, because he even goes into it. He mentions a lot of the oldest black churches in the country. Big Bethel in Atlanta, and he references the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, Abyssinian up in New York. They're like 150, 175-year-old churches.
200.
Right, exactly. So, but he continues to reiterate, all those churches ever focused on was the fact that Jesus saves. Jesus saves.
That's
and it's
historically inaccurate.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, historically for Big Bethel, it's not. He said that their sign out front of their church for like 100 years, it never changed. All it said was Jesus saved.
I'm talking about in practice. It wasn't just people running around saying Jesus saves.
Yeah. Well,
people
I'm talking
built
about
communities.
In terms of
That's right.
Just like their
The theology.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, to a certain degree, like I understand, the point, because yes, Jesus does save. That's why he came to earth. I get it. But if that's all he did, then the moment that I would have accepted Jesus, I would have been teleported to heaven, right? There's actually a reason, right, that he left me here on the earth after I accepted, the relationship with him. After I embraced and decided to follow him, he leaves me here. Well, why is that? Because there's more to, I think, the quote-unquote gospel than what mainstream church will let on, because at the end of the day, they have constituents. And when you have constituents, you have to cater to those constituents. And if those constituents, if all they want to hear is Jesus saves, right? That's all I really want to hear. I don't really want to hear, Dan, the spirit, soul, and body. Because if I start talking about spirit, soul, and body, I'm going to have to get into things that might make me uncomfortable. Right, that might push me out of my comfort zone, but it is part of the full quote unquote gospel, right? And so I think that's where a Christian who might be black, right, would then listen to, I'm not going to mention any names, but some of these guys who are out now, some of these guys who are clearly humanists and are not looking for reconciliation, but are looking for a power transfer, but because they address needs and issues that impact my life, right? They impact the lives of people. Christians who happen to be black would be inclined to listen. They'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's why my neighborhood is struggling economically, or that's why my schools don't receive the right funding, or, that's why the imprisonment rate of people that look like me is so much higher, just going down the line. Whereas a person who, in terms of our belief, we would align, but in terms of anything else, we are like miles apart.
Yeah, and I would say I know we've addressed this before, on the flip side with the white Americans, I think that if the church as a whole really took a biblical approach to, what the gospel says, a lot of those white Americans who, are the Breitbart News followers, all that stuff, they would stop identifying themselves as Christians. They would, if the church actually took a stand on what, on social justice, on these issues, then they would realize that, their views don't align with what the Bible says, and the church leaders would recognize that as well and call them out for that. But because the church refuses to address these things, they feel comfortable in, a lot of, these, racists and bigots, honestly, they feel comfortable in these churches because we're not addressing these things.
Right. So there's a point that he makes in the article, and I just want to get y'all thoughts on it. He says one of the reasons that he thinks that the gospel should be enough, and again, I would respond to that about in terms of what the gospel is. I just want to get y'all point before we, shift off of this. Is he says that the overuse of words like oppression and racist and things like that.
Wait. Did you just say overuse?
I'm just quoting the gentleman's article, and he is a guy, so I can say guy this time. I'm just quoting.
Wait, overuse of oppression? I agree. Oppression is overused.
Yeah.
You know, overuse. Is that what he said?
Actual oppression is overused.
Yes,
It should be old by now.
Overuse of the word.
Oh, overuse of the word.
Overuse of the word. He was just saying, I mean, his point, I think, makes sense, because what he's saying is when a term is overused, it removes some of the power of the term.
It becomes cliche.
Yeah, it becomes more cliche, because now everything, oh, that's racist. Oh, what, you just bought them biscuits? That's right. You know, and everything and anything that someone may do, we start calling it racist.
Biscuits, man.
You know, that's the first word that came to my mind.
Biscuits.
Biscuits.
Terrible.
Yeah,
you know,
cultural
cultural appropriation.
Which is, that's one of the topics we addressed a while back. But yeah, that's something that can be overused as well.
Yeah.
No, I'm just referencing a podcast we had earlier back. I don't know if you remember, AJ.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quite honestly, sounds like a think piece designed to get some clicks. Sounds like clickbait, where it's like, okay, let me just write on whatever topics are trending and let me mix these things up, because I get the idea where he's trying to patch a hole where it seems like there's a gaping, open, clear criticism and critique that people have against his particular his particular group that he aligns himself to, which is the Black church. And rather than dealing with those critiques, it's just kind of like, well, let me go ahead and just like just try to plug the hole, so to speak, and say, well, y'all wrong too. And hopefully that just kind of like stops the attendance from dropping, basically.
Mm-hmm. Nah, you know,
but he doesn't really know what he's talking about.
No, I think he took some historical stuff and then drew some conclusions.
Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah. I don't want to completely discredit any person's, any Homo sapiens education, but because we all know in part.
Yeah.
But Anyway.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. So I just look at it as, you know, my takeaway from it, again, because he says, is the gospel enough? And my takeaway from it is, you know, twofold. Yes, the gospel is enough if we are talking about the full gospel of the kingdom.
Yeah.
If it's the gospel that most Western churches prop up, then
agree.
no. Then I would say no, it's not enough.
Yeah, which is more than likely what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Because, and the reason that I think it's a good question to ask, although, you know, his, you know, some of the things, the conclusions he might have drawn I might not agree with, but the reason it's a good question to ask is because, you know, similar to what Dan just said, you know, this is a question that Christians who happen to be Black have to ask themselves, because what we cannot expect, and I've said this before on the podcast, is we cannot expect societal reform without spiritual transformation. We cannot expect people who are not seeking reconciliation, but just a power transfer. Like, I cannot look to them for the total solution, right? I can listen to them and say, oh, okay, that's a good point, and just keep it moving. But I can't point to that person and say, yo, this is the guy that, or this is the woman that we have to, you know, align ourselves with, because that individual does not seek the reconciliation, you know, spoken about in Scripture. And so from that aspect, I just think it's a good question to throw out, because I think what it should do is get Christians who are Black to be thinking like, yo, yeah, okay, the gospel should be enough. Then why isn't it? And then we can start, you know, begin to go down and research and begin to add, you know, like the Bible says, add to our faith, you know. So I do think it's a good question to ask. And so, you know, it's just one of those things where Christians, we got to do better, right?
Well, I think one of the ways we do better is just to think critically and behave accordingly. So we have a lot of resources at our disposal, especially now that social media is as big as it is, and I don't see it going away.
Yeah.
So use those resources. Don't discount a resource because a person has one deficiency or another deficiency. Use your resources, think critically, continue to self-examine, because everybody's going through a process of our life and we're maturing in different ways that we weren't mature 5 years prior. So take all those things into consideration and live accordingly. I think that's one solution to this. And it's difficult to be introspective because then you look at your past self and say, oh man, I was terrible. But this is a part of the course of life, and we need to be responsible for that, especially if you influence mentees and children, in your own circle.
No, definitely. And so just to pivot off of that, because I think, race is a drum that we can beat all day, every day, right? You can sort of beat that dead horse. It just got me thinking, and sometimes it's apples to apples, sometimes it's apples to oranges, right? But when you think about racism and then you
watermelons to biscuits.
Watermelons to biscuits. Yeah, watermelons to biscuits. Fried chicken to ham hocks, right? Anyway. But when, sometimes it's apples to apples, right? Sometimes it's apples to oranges when you compare and contrast sexism and racism, right? And so there was a New York Times article, and again, these things are a couple weeks old, guys. Forgive us. We've been out the pocket for a week or so.
Are we about to compete in the Oppression Olympics?
No, we're not going to compete in the Oppression Olympics.
You go with that sexism again. Okay.
No, I'm all for, trashing people who are sexist. I'm all for, I'm all for it. Like I'm here for that.
So you're for the oppression of sexists.
I didn't know that was a thing, but okay, there we go.
Okay.
I'm all about prejudice against sexism. But the New York Times put out an article back in November 21st, and this is before before Matt Lauer that just came out this week, before Russell Simmons, before a few more folks that have come out in like the last week and a half or so. And they listed 34 people.
And by come out, you mean exposed?
Exposed.
They
Yeah.
didn't necessarily just came out and said,
news
hey,
came
everybody,
out.
my bad.
Well, no, not them coming out.
Right,
But like the
right.
news
They were
came
exposed.
out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Got it.
And they listed 34 names.
34.
Of, different journalists, producers, directors, actors, just people who have been caught up in this whole Me Too. Even Al Franken, the senator from Minnesota, he's on there.
The little singer dude. He plays the piano, and he
plays the piano?
Yeah, and he's a politician. Yeah.
Oh, I remember he was on SNL back in the day.
Yeah.
Remember Al Franken was on SNL? Yeah.
So
But anyway.
he was a comedian.
Yeah, he was a
There you
comedian
go.
at one
Yeah, he's a
time.
comedian, yeah.
Jack of all trades, including
Yeah.
sexism, I see.
Like Weird Al Yankovic. No disrespect to Weird Al Yankovic. I ain't
Right,
bring
don't
his
lump-
name up in here.
don't lump poor
He the
Weird Al
last
in
one.
here.
Yeah, he the last one.
Considering he's weird is in his
Mandatory
name.
Fun out this joint. That's the last album's name was Mandatory Fun. He's like on the front, like looking like Stalin.
I just love how he's been doing the same thing since we were in elementary school, maybe prior. I just love
Getting
Weird
paid.
Al.
Guy's brilliant.
And considering weird is in his name, he's not caught up in this. But so I was looking at this. I mean, they got Charlie Rose. He got fired by CBS. I mean, they just list all the guys. I mean, we know about Louis C.K. We talked about Louis C.K. and we talked about Weinstein.
Pulled out the AR-15 on Charlie Rose. He was the last person.
I know. I mean,
Garrison Keillor was the last person I expected.
I don't even know who that is.
From NPR, So
Kevin Spacey, Mark Halpern.
Who that?
He's a news reporter. He got fired from NBC News. I mean, dudes get dropped instantly. Like, I mean, it just
Off
come
of
out.
sexism.
Yeah, like from sexism, it's like the little, and they
The guys must be crazy, joint.
Yeah,
with it.
Oh
blowing
man,
the
you
little-
taking me
little-
all the
yeah,
way back.
Little tube you blow.
Yeah.
Yeah, hit you in the back of the
And
neck.
hit you in the back, and they're gone. And so I was,
Laugh at that tragedy.
I know we shouldn't be laughing at guys like people's
Dan's
lives
not laughing
falling.
though.
Yeah, Dan's the voice of
He has a
reason.
smirk.
No,
he's laughing on the
Yeah,
inside.
he's
I
laughing
know
on
he
the
is.
inside. You could tell. Yeah.
So I was just looking at the article, 34 names. And if you want to throw in these last handful, let's call it 40, right?
Come on.
40
Why not?
na-
We'll just
And
round
fun.
up.
Let's just round up. You can round to 400.
Put some empty seats. They're going to be full by next week.
Right. I know, right? By the time this comes out, it's going to be like 2,000 names. But they go back all the way to October 5th. That's when Weinstein was exposed. That's the first one, right? 34 names. We can round up to 40 if you want to throw in Matt and Russell Simmons and a bunch of these other guys who've been called out recently. And so I say, man, look at how quickly, because I'm like Matt Lauer's thing happened in 24 hours. Like that was
net.
crazy. Like I don't know if y'all saw the next morning on the Today Show, the other lady who's his co-host, she didn't know what to say. She was like, "Yeah, I was just told before the show that Matt was fired," and she
Really? I knew the night before on Twitter. Okay.
this is what she was saying.
Okay.
That they were just told a couple hours ago. She was, and you could, her face look, unless she's a really good actress. Yeah, she was kind of like, I don't know what to say right now. Matt's a good friend, and this other lady was like sitting in for Matt. She was like, we were just told a couple hours ago. We're sorry for Matt's family.
Should
We're
have brought
sorry
in
for the
Steve
lady.
Harvey.
And Tamron Hall was caught doing the Cabbage Patch. No, just kidding.
And the other lady, they were talking about Tamron Hall and Ann Curry. They're like, yeah, I wonder what they're doing right now.
We're like, what did you think?
But my whole point for bringing all that up, and we go through all that, and it's the New York Times article, is, I know Eve just said the oppression Olympics, and this is not to do that. This is just to highlight a particular point, is how quickly and how swiftly people are dealt with when it comes to sexism as opposed to racism. When it comes to sexism, in terms of sexist acts, like, I was shocked that Matt Lauer was fired in 24 hours. Like, he's been with NBC for like 25 years. Maybe like a little suspension or something like that. I didn't expect him to get fired, but that's just me. I didn't expect Charlie Rose to get fired. I mean, these guys have been around for decades. You think a little slap on the wrist, because that's what you expect to see when it's a racist act. It's like, they get a little slap on the wrist, but they keep it moving. Like, this joint is like, Louis C.K., we canceling your movie. Kevin Spacey, we canceling your movie.
Yeah, but
yeah,
I don't know. That's just a thought that had crossed my mind.
Yeah, but I guess we do get into the apples and oranges things here, because I know we mentioned a little bit in pre-production, but the physical acts, that they're talking about, are much different than someone saying racist words. So you'd have to get into what is a comparable a sexist act comparable to a racist act? Like, what's a comparable racist act to someone who's committing sexual abuse? Like, what it would be someone maybe
shooting and killing a black person.
Yeah, well, obviously,
and saying they did it because the person was black or something.
Yeah, so
overt.
It's hard to. It is. I feel that it's kind of hard to quantify that. I mean, obviously, if someone does an act and they say, they hit someone, oh, I hit you because you're black, then maybe, or I beat you up because you're black, then that would be a comparable act. And I haven't seen, as far as the media, I haven't seen much. I've seen people, exposed for saying racist words, and then they'll get a slap on the wrist. I haven't heard anyone kind of doing any physical racist acts, which I think is, what we're talking about here, physical sexist or sexual acts against.
Well, just to clarify, all of these are not acts. Some of them are like words. Some of them are, lewd text messages. Every single one in this list of 34 is not a like rape or groping or something like that. I just want to clarify that.
Well, racism versus sexism. Racism, you're talking about two deep-seated isms. Racism undergirds this country. And look no further than the beautification of slavery. When it moved from open-air slavery to beautified slavery, which is imprisonment, because all prison is a sentence on someone to work for an extended period of time for little or no pay.
And then an extended sentence when they're released for
exactly
until the day they die, regardless of their crime.
Exactly, and it's great marketing because they broke a law, so we could look at them and say, well, good for you. So it's
got him. Right.
Got him is great marketing. Sexism, first of all, is also something that has been going on for a very, very long time and predates this country. But remember that approximately, and you can search this on your own and find out, but a lot of people may not necessarily be aware that pornography is just about maybe 1/3 of the whole internet. So, you,
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah, like all of the websites, all of the servers,
Like all
that-
internet traffic,
Yeah.
1/3 is pornography.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, probably more than that. Yeah, just like over 90% of the email that you get is spam. It's just weeded out so
Yeah.
that you can get the real stuff.
Props to Gmail.
Yeah, so
Sponsor us anytime, Google.
yeah,
Anytime.
so if you understand, I'm not trying to get super spiritual, but if you understand like chakras, and you understand like the lower self and the higher self, and with the philosophy of chakras, that's like it's an analog, and you move through it, right? You don't just jump to the top. You move from the bottom to the middle to the top to your
Right.
higher self. And so what I'm saying is that sexism is something that's way bigger, is way like it's huge. And so I'm just speaking for people who don't want to speak, right?
Okay.
But we all know that what's popping and what's really going down in our thoughts and our behaviors, we all do. Now, some people express those thoughts and that behavior to the detriment of others and through power. Right. And so finally, we're getting at a point right now because Harvey Weinstein, for whatever reason, maybe he got too big for his britches out there in Hollywood, but he took that huge L from Roman Farrow. And then now, like, there's a bit of a trend that's happening where people are just coming out strength in numbers. And so I'm sitting back and I'm watching, I'm eating my popcorn, and I'm just saying, like, who's next? But sexism, it's not something that, okay, now it's just like Matt Lauer just caught that L because he just did something. No, it's because NBC knows like what's really going on right now, and they don't want to get caught. Like now it's like almost okay. It's not cool to harbor them, is what I'm trying to say. Otherwise, they would have continued harboring like they've been doing.
Well, getting back to your lower self, higher self remark, that goes back to something I think is ingenious that people have said and that you have repeated, or maybe you invented it. I think about being low on the brainstem.
No, that was your thought, right?
No, I definitely wasn't.
Yeah, I didn't invent that.
Yeah, but I think that's a really important reference
Mm-hmm.
going back to that lower self, and that might be, to answer your question, AJ. That might be why maybe it's so much easier or so much more instinctual to violate someone based on sex. It's a base. It's a primal response. You see something you like, you go for it, without any consideration.
So you don't think that racism is a problem?
Race, of course, I think racism is a problem. But
No.
In terms of
primal.
Primal. Yeah, and that's the question: is responding to someone based on their external appearance as primal as responding to someone based on just visceral, just attraction, just animal attraction. I think that the animal attraction part might be the brainstem. And then, beyond that, tribalism, which is what human beings have practiced from the beginning of time, is natural and primal as well. But I don't know if it's as base as the sort of the knee-jerk reaction of seeing something that you think you like.
Yeah, I'm just gonna be honest. I'm kind of a little lost about the higher or lower self, all that you're talking about.
In Christian parlance, it's flesh versus spirit. Same, it's the same thing.
Okay, yeah, but basically, as has been pointed out, both of these issues, racism and sexism, are deep-seated issues, and I do kind of hear your point, Eva, as far as kind of like if we go all the way back to the beginning of the history of mankind, what issue surfaced first? There could be an argument that sexism was the first issue before racism even became an issue, because I don't believe if we go all the way back, racism was an issue at the beginning. I think we could probably trace a time where it did start to become an issue, where we did start to divide amongst each other as people based on skin tone or culture. But looking at the here and now in America here and now, what is the bigger issue? Honestly, I believe racism is the bigger issue in this culture here and now. And as getting back to AJ's point, aside from, I did make the comment as far as looking at the physical, comparing the physical acts and making sure, we're not comparing physical acts to words. But if you say just going on words, if you say sexist comments compared to racist comments, you are going to get more of a backlash in society by saying sexist comments than you would racist comments. And I believe that is shown throughout the media coverage on those things.
What is the reason for that? What do you think the reason would be, Dan?
I do agree a little bit with Avery as far as just the deep-seated issues in this country regarding slavery being the foundation of this country, regarding oppression throughout the centuries and today. And slavery didn't just end; it became Jim Crow laws. And now it became, the pipeline to prison. So it's still going on. And I think when we look back, the last century, the 1920th century, the movement that seemed to gain more traction at first was for women's rights compared to civil rights. And,
Right.
and so that seemed to have a bit more back in this country, and I think that's what we're more behind than we're back in it more than we are with people's civil rights, honestly. So we're taking more stock in treating making sure that women get treated more fairly than someone of a different race. Obviously, again, to Eva's point, this is not a oppression Olympics, and we're not trying to compete about who's oppressed more.
No, it's more about the hearts of people, right? Because when you mentioned social media, think about in general people's response. If I just tweet the hashtag Me Too, oh really? Oh man! But if I then tweet the hashtag Black Lives Matter, oh man, come on, man! You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I haven't said anything else. I just tweeted the hashtag, and the response that you'd get would be starkly different. And that's where I'm like, if these guys were committing racist acts or racist words, doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. Racist acts or racist words. I mean, for God's sakes, Medgar Evers' killer got convicted 20, 30 years later? I mean, so whether it's acts or words, and I was just looking through the list. So Rick Najera from CBS, all he did, this is what his accusation was, inappropriate comments to performers, and he was forced to resign. So that's what I'm saying. Everybody on the list, it wasn't an act. Now, there are guys who committed acts in here, but there are a bunch of guys that just said stuff inappropriate, and they're gone. Like, poof, pow, be gone. Remember Martin Lawrence, poof, pow, be gone. All right, anyway. Right?
Shanae.
With Shanae, yeah, poof, pow, be gone, yeah. All right, just hashtag. Shout out to Martin Lawrence. But just some words, just some inappropriate comments, right, to performers. Now, again, just to drive that point home, how many environments have we been in where inappropriate racist comments have been said by people in managerial positions in power, and nothing happens? It's just kind of like, it's kind of shrugged off, laughed off,
Well,
But if those same comments were sexist, it would the visceral nature of the response, I think, would be much stronger. And I think to Dan's point, there's a certain backing, there's a certain feeling, there's a certain empathy with sexism that you do not see from people when it pertains to racism.
And looking down the timeline of American history, which, that's the way that my brain works, the only thing that I can think people who oppose what you just said would be able to point to is that black men got the vote before white women. But that's the only point that I can think of within American history.
Historically,
historically, where there would have been any, if you're looking at preference, and I think that even black men getting the right to vote before white women was political. But, regardless of all that, that's the only thing I can see. Because you brought up a very important point that we can have a whole podcast on about the consequences given to these people who murdered these civil rights folks. We have first of all, we have hundreds of years, but we have a critical mass within history, a critical time period within 20th century history during the civil rights movement, where a lot of people were murdered who were fighting for the right to vote, for example, and
equality,
the right for our equality to be recognized. Many more people have killers who are still walking around, maybe walking on a cane, or maybe they're passed and then they have relatives who knew about it. But people who either went to their graves or are extremely old right now who never were prosecuted.
That's good.
Even if they were brought to we have a whole group of people right now who are living right now who are not like the killer of Medgar Evers. That's something that was, but the swamps of Mississippi, we have all kinds of locations where these types of things took place where nobody said a word. And even remember, I think it's earlier this year, even the person who accused Emmett Till of something that either way his killing did not match is now repenting. And, of course, you 1 foot in the grave and now you're going to repent. And the boy has been dead since he was 14 years old. So there's something there. And I appreciate this topic being brought up where and it's difficult to point to the actual reason, but racism is systematic in this country. And for some reason, we shrink back, even when Howard Stern made the nappy-headed hose comment years ago.
That wasn't Howard Stern, but yeah.
Who was it?
No, it's Don Imus.
Yeah,
Don Imus.
Yeah,
thank you. It was not Howard Stern, but it was Don Imus. I've remembered Don Imus since basically when I was born. He's like a fixture in New York radio. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember there being any huge consequence going to him based on what he said about those basketball players. So there's just...
There was just a little slap on the wrist. He was just made to apologize. That's it.
Between the way that our nation responds to people who make sexist comments versus racist and actions as well.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to minimize in any way, shape, or form, women who have experienced sexist acts, because it is
not at all.
It's atrocious, and literally
women and men.
Yeah,
women and men. Yeah, has shout out to Terry Crews who exposed all that stuff that happened to him. He was actually on Good Morning America. He got interviewed, but to all Homo sapiens who that has happened to, this is not to minimize any of that, but it is to really, bring attention to the way in which people respond to different forms of oppression, right? Different forms of misconduct,
injustice. Yeah,
different types of injustice. I think that our hearts have to be open across the board when people experience, things that are an affront to their humanity. We have to have empathy for people and just understand that just because something that you've gone through doesn't mean that you can just kind of dismiss it and brush it aside. So, are you lost in translation? Are you looking to expand your business to the booming Asian market? Let us introduce you to Sinotrans International. At Sinotrans International, they are dedicated to becoming your bilingual gateway to bridge the language and cultural barrier between you and the booming Asian marketplace worldwide. Whatever your language needs are, Sinotrans has an international team of native experts who specialize in high-quality, reliable, and accurate Asian language translation services for high-tech, legal, commercial, and all major industries. Get in touch with Sinotrans today for a free quote. Call 650-856-0749 or visit them at www.sinotransinternational.com. That's SINOTRANSINTL.com. Please support our sponsors the way they support this podcast and let them know you heard about them at Across the Intersection. All right, and we're back. What's going on, everybody? So I read an article in the Gospel Coalition, or on the Gospel Coalition's website. It was about a gentleman. His name is Cole Brown. Cole, second Martin Lawrence reference of the show.
Yeah.
Coley Cole. Oh, Coley Cole wrote wrote an article. He's a pastor of a church in Portland, Oregon, and it's a church in which he himself identifies it as a quote unquote multi-ethnic church. And the title of his article is concerns about pursuing multi-ethnic churches, which I thought was interesting since he is a self-proclaimed pastor of a multi-ethnic church. I thought that was very interesting. And so what Cole did was he mentioned 3 particular points. I don't know, they were like cautions or whatever, in terms of his view of multi-ethnic churches planting, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I'm just going to read off the 3, then we chop it up. So he says his first point, and he goes into depth on each point, but for sake of time, we're just going to talk about each point. He says he worries that many who desire to lead multi-ethnic churches continue to live mono-ethnic lives. And I thought, okay. His second concern, he said, he worries that many who desire to lead multi-ethnic churches continue to listen to mono-ethnic voices. And then he said he worries that many who desire to lead multi-ethnic churches confuse having people of color present in a church with being multi-ethnic.
Question: is this a black guy?
No, white guy.
Oh, okay. See, that frames it for me. Okay.
And it's kind of funny because something that he mentioned in the article was the reason that he had these concerns is because he gets calls from other white pastors like, yo, what do I got to do to make my church multi-ethnic? He's like, you calling me? I'm a white guy.
Either way, it seems like there's a problem right there. If I am a multi-ethnic person, right, talking about organically, creating a honest lifestyle and honest ministry. If I'm a multi-ethnic person, then I don't even have to say I want to lead a multi-ethnic church. That will be an outgrowth of who I am.
Right.
So my question becomes, why would someone who knows that they're mono-ethnic and doesn't necessarily change that within themselves say, I want to have a multi-ethnic church? Unless it's a trend, where do they get that idea from if they are mono-ethnic?
I think some of the points that he did speak to it about, not having mono-ethnic voices and making sure your lifestyle is not mono-ethnic. So those things need to come first, before, if I believe, those things are addressed first before you start this church, then that won't be an issue. I know we spoke pre-production a little bit. We keep saying pre-production, but
we sound fancy. Yeah, we sound fancy.
But my issue altogether is with this, when we try to create these multi-ethnic churches, we try to create them rather than, as the term AJ used, organically, that letting it organically happen. So if I'm trying to put a church in a white suburban area, then I'm going to get mostly white people. And then if I'm trying to make a multi-ethnic and just trying to kind of force, people of different cultures to, I use the term force loosely, but really trying to coerce them to come to the church, that's manufactured. And so it's not happening organically and it's not genuine. But if I'm going to a neighborhood which has different cultures, different ethnicities there, then I establish a church there and I'm genuine about it, then those different ethnicities come to the church and it becomes multi-ethnic. Obviously, you can go to being a church in a multi-ethnic neighborhood doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a multi-ethnic church, because you can, as some of the points that he made, if you're living a monolithic, but I was going to say mono-ethnic lifestyle, and you're hearing mono-ethnic voices, and you try to you go into a multi-ethnic neighborhood, but you're trying to establish a quote-unquote white church and how you run things
Yes.
and what you teach, because you may not necessarily say I only want white people here, but you're catering to a white culture in a multi-ethnic neighborhood, then that's dead wrong. But if you're really desiring to not follow that trend of mono-ethnicism and really trying to establish a church, that your teaching would really reflect what the Bible says, because the Bible is not mono-ethnic. The Bible addresses all cultures. If you're teaching flat out what the Bible says, not American Christianity, but what the Bible says in a multi-ethnic neighborhood, then you will have organically, you will have a multi-ethnic church.
All kinds of heart checks need to take place, maybe for 5-10 years. You need to go to a therapist before you even embark on that. And part of the reason I bring this up is because there are 2 examples that spring to mind immediately. Actually, one of them is in Chicago. I had a friend who's in Chicago, and there was a white culture, or just a white pastor, who decided to plant in a black neighborhood. 2 problems arise. The first problem is that there was an assumption on the part of this person, and this happens all the time, that if he wants black people, he goes straight to the middle of poverty. That was like, there are all kinds of black people running around. This person is middle class.
Running around.
Yes, there are all kinds of black people running around. The guy who wanted to plant a church is middle class, and he comes from that type of cultural environment. But when he thinks, okay, I need to find black people in my church, he goes directly to the center of poverty. What is it that causes him, first of all, economically, to go straight to a poverty-stricken neighborhood? And to him, that is a black neighborhood. Why didn't he go? I have plenty of friends in Chicago who I went to undergrad with who are in middle-class black neighborhoods. Why is it that, first of all, the assumption is that if I want to minister to black people and I'm a white person and I want to plant a church in a black neighborhood, why is the first thing that comes to mind, I need to find the poorest, most destitute neighborhood there is? First of all, so that's the first problem, and that's the reason why a heart check needs to take place. The second reason is that the friend of mine who was a part of this church plant had a situation where...
Oh, they were a part of it. Okay.
Well, yeah, this is a black friend who actually joined this white church plant in the middle of the hood. But the problem was the hood was looked down upon in just the most ugly possible way by the people who ran this church. So the people, they were in this neighborhood, but they were looking at the inhabitants of the neighborhood just in a way that was disdainful of their culture, the way that they spoke, their level of education. There was no regard for them as image bearers of God. And there was a desire to correct things that had nothing to do with sin. These were just cultural things. And some of these attributes that the folks had were not even cultural. They were poverty based. There's a certain things that come about because of poverty, not because of the innate culture. Right. So I think that someone who decides, okay, I want to have a multi-ethnic, or I want to actually traverse the whole or transcend all of ethnicity and just go into a neighborhood, they need to do plenty of heart checks before they even think about doing it. Yep. Because even things that they don't even realize that they are doing, coming into a different neighborhood or trying to have a mixed group within their church, they're doing, and it's actually very ruinous, and it turns people away from Christ.
Well, this is what he said. He said in the article, I just want to read one line. He says, becoming a multi-ethnic church is not a program change. He said, if your life isn't multi-ethnic, it will be difficult and potentially damaging to try and make a multi-ethnic church. I thought that was like, that's pretty much spot on to what you just said. Yeah.
Well, I think that due to our history, that white people have a different responsibility than black people, and then the in-betweens. Because really that's what it is. Like when we say people of color, it's primarily black people, and then we form allegiances with other groups that are much smaller in percentage, except for Central and South Americans. But anyway, I think that white people have a different responsibility. And so I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with the thought. I think that it's very important to be thinking about air quotes diversity, but I think that it needs to be called for what it is. And the PC way of saying monoethnic. That's why I asked, like, okay, well, what is this person? Because I thought the person was black, and there are different rules. There are different rules for black people than there are white people. Like, I mean, there are, because we have a different history, we have a different heritage,
No,
you're
right.
lineage,
You're right.
and there are different rules. That's why, like, I just, but I had to ask that question. I'm like, okay, so I agree with a lot of what was said. I agree. I think that that multi-ethnic part of life, what is like your basis and your view of where you fit in the world, is very important. Because you carry that into a leadership position, then you're going to be continuing the very thing that you say that you're trying to dismantle. And that idea of white man's burden, which I didn't make that term up. That's historically a white term, right? And manifest destiny, and that is the concept of civilizing the savage, which was a mission statement essentially for colonialism. And so that's exactly what it is. Like that idea, what you just described. What's wrong with these people? We're here. We want to help them. You know, because there's nothing necessarily wrong in my eyes to target an impoverished area that happens to be black. It's like we can't run from that. That's what a majority of our places are. But a lot of yes. Our median household income. Remember we said before $4,000, and we're broke. Yeah. In 2053, we're gonna have zero wealth.
Most black people are not in the poverty-stricken category. My issue is not that you would go and minister to poverty-stricken people. I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm saying that what comes to the mind of a person when they think about ministering to black folks is poverty. Yeah. When most black people are not under the poverty line, I think people need to self-examine. That's all.
Yeah, I think.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
Because I mean, statistics would say otherwise.
No. I mean, well, I would.
Not, I mean, we're in Prince George's County, but there's not.
No, I'm not
even
talking about where we are
now.
Like most black people are not under the poverty line, and that hasn't been the case in a long time. So it's just bizarre. I think people need to.
So we're gonna have to get back to that. They need to do a hard
check. Yeah.
We're gonna have to get back to that. Okay.
I think there's a couple of issues here. We talked about the multicultural aspect. Eva hinted out at the classism thing. That's another thing too. So I think that important not only if not to have quote unquote mono-ethnic lives if you're trying to establish a multi-ethnic church, but if you're trying to go into an impoverished neighborhood, you shouldn't have a classism life.
Yeah.
Either a thing that that I commend some pastors for is that they will live in the neighborhoods that they're trying to reach, and that's what I would encourage, especially if you're coming from a middle class background but you're trying to reach out to an impoverished neighborhood. You need to live in that neighborhood. You need to understand the life. You need to establish relationships with people of a different classism or different class than yourself, whether you're a white pastor, whether you're a black pastor. I think there's a difference. There's a divide. It's not just ethnicity, but we're different based on what class we are. Like, oftentimes, and I don't want to stray this topic too much, but we can oftentimes even relate to people of different races if we're the same class. If we're all middle class, then we could with someone even of the same race who's of a different class.
Yeah, I just look at this particular article. Like I said, when we talked about it before we recorded, I believe that this guy had a genuine heart. Listen, you don't set out to start a church most of the time without a genuine heart. I know there are
absolutely
there are cats that are crooks that start churches to do business, and there are a lot of churches that are just business. But the people. I'm not talking about the institution because I really have very little love for the institution, but it's the people. And so this guy sounds like he had a genuine heart. And I think the misconception is, Because another statement that he makes in the article, which I think is very powerful, and I think it goes to Avery's point, was in the U.S. there's no more visible and inexplicable unity than unity across racial divide because of the history of this country. Because of the history of this country, race unity, racial unity is one of the most powerful displays of unity that the church can portray. But here's the issue. I don't believe that multi-ethnic, quote unquote, churches are the route to take for that. I think that, like Dan was saying, if I'm in a white neighborhood, the church is going to be full of white people.
Yeah.
If I'm in a black neighborhood, it's going to be full of black folks. If I'm in a Spanish neighborhood, it's going to be a lot of Latinos or Chicanos, or, what I'm saying? That is the people group that surrounds the place where I gather and fellowship. That's not the problem. The problem is, as Eve was saying, that we have the inability of seeing the image of God in people who don't look like us. That is the real problem. So if I'm a white Christian or a black Christian or a whatever Christian, I need to learn to be able to see the image of God in people who don't look like me. And then I can go to a white church and it doesn't matter. Because when I get around my brothers who don't look like me, I still see God. I can still hear God. See, we can't do that because you don't look like me, or you're not from the denomination I'm from, or you're not where I'm from geographically, whatever it is. And so we have to create, like Dan said, we have to manufacture this artificial multicultural space in order to try to do that. When in actuality, if we were to disciple the people properly, going back to our first story, full gospel, if we were to disciple the people properly, when we leave, we can go to all white space and it'd be all good. I can go to all black space, it would still be all good. Or anywhere else and it'd be all good. But we can't do that now, because when I get there, all of a sudden it's, and like you said, that disdain rises up.
And by the way, that's why I give a lot of credit to the to people like Brian Dye out of the same city, Chicago, who actually has gone in and he and his wife have done this for a long time and actually planted their own lives within certain communities and actually are ministering from that organic perspective. So there are people doing it right, but there are also people doing it what I would consider to be wrong, where that separation and you must become like I am culturally before we can even preach the gospel to you. There's something off about that.
And there's roots of that, in going back to the earliest days of Christianity. Unfortunately, I read a book years ago by a Native American brother that said that's the root of the indigenous people's resistance to Christianity. It has nothing to do with the actual faith itself. It has to deal with the action of literally trying to erase their culture. So they resist Christianity because of that.
Yeah,
so anyway,
just kind of, again, going back to the point I made before, it's about really establishing churches based on the Bible, not our cultural preferences, and not trying to change anyone's cultural preferences, not trying to make them adjust to that. But if we're just preaching what the Bible says, then there will be unity. But if we're trying to cause people to adjust to our culture, our ideology, then
hashtag stick to that Bible.
I mean, honestly, if we did that, we'd have to close 90% of churches. I mean, I'm sorry to piss off Christian people, but if what you just said, if we did that, we would literally have to close 90 to 95% of the churches worldwide and start over again, so, which is what people ain't going to do. They're not going to do that. So we're going to, unfortunately, it's going to kind of go on the way it is. I'm kind of that glass half empty person, but because in order to do what you just said, Dan, it's a structural change. It's not a change in people and operation. It's a literal structural change. And it's like, it's speaking from a construction perspective, it's one thing to come in here and renovate this house, right? Take some walls down, repaint, new carpet. I can do that fast. But if I want to change the structure of this house, that's different. That's significant demolition. I have to demolish some things and rebuild in a different way. That's a different thing. And so to do what you just said requires some demolition first. We got to go in and throw the TNT and boom and blow some things up, which is what Christians ain't going to do, because that gets into my bread, that gets into other areas, and people get scared when you start saying, yo, what you're doing structurally is ineffective or unbiblical or whatever. So we got to start over.
Yeah, well, and this is a whole nother topic. If we don't do it, then I think God is going to do that. And I mentioned before how persecution is what I think will unify us as Christians. When that comes, the whole house is going down and it's going to be rebuilt from the ground up.
Next time somebody tells you, "I wish we were like the first century church," just say, "Yo, you want them chopping your head off too? You want them throwing you in the lion, in the Colosseum with the lions? Guess you get ripped apart." Anyway, so we're gonna end off this week, guys. I know we just took a really good thing and just made it really, really negative.
I wouldn't mind meeting at Phoebe's house and taking the steeple and burning it. Phoebe, let's meet at your house.
Yeah. No, you know how I do. So that you preach to the choir. So go ahead.
Those things happen today.
Yeah.
Just not here.
Yeah, just not in the U.S. Yeah,
yes.
in Western culture. You're exactly right, because I know people from the Ukraine and from China,
and Africa and West Asia. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this week in the news, we thank y'all for rocking with us. So long this week, but we just wanted to wrap it up on a interesting point. For our this week in the news segment. Hashtag TWINW something, I don't know.
This week in the news. Okay, yeah. Got it.
I got to get better at hashtags. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Justin Webley, he was interviewed by a Christian publication in Britain. It's called Peston on Sunday. And if you guys want to look it up, the publication is called Premier, Premier. It's a publication out of the United Kingdom. But Mr. Webley, he's interviewed by this gentleman, Mr. Peston, on his, I guess it's like a weekly Sunday, like the Sunday news talk shows here in the United States. They have the same thing in England. And he's asked about 45. And Archbishop Webley very poignantly says he does not understand the support that 45 gets in large part from Christians. He said he just doesn't understand how a man whose stance is on women, whose stance is on immigration and minorities, he just does not understand how an individual like that can receive such wholesale support from Christians in America. And I thought that was such an interesting thing for him to say, being someone who's kind of an outsider to U.S., Christian ideology, right? Someone who's not in this country. He's not indoctrinated all day long with God and country and, Jesus was a patriot, all of that stuff that you hear 24/7 over here. Someone out of this sort of sphere to then look at it from the outside looking in and say, how are you people who call yourselves Christians, how are you supporting this guy? I mean, just like en masse. And if you guys are interested, like Peston on Sunday, you can go follow him on Twitter. The interview is actually on Twitter as well. He puts the clip on Twitter. But just wanted to throw that out there. So an outside Christian leader from another country looking at American Christianity saying, how do you support this individual? How do you support 45 in, so forcefully?
It also goes to show that those of us who do not support him, need to work on our public relations, because of course the assumption for him is, some people might say it's correct or not correct, is that Christians in America support 45. Mm-hmm. And so, some people don't like Christians to have opposing opinions in the public sphere or on the public square, but we should show that there are actually Christians who are looking at this Bible and comparing our leaders to it and making decisions.
Yeah, and kind of more to that point, I'm kind of looking at how Britain is. I think they are similar to the United States in a lot of ways. There are not just the conservative Christians, there's the liberal Christians, and I could very well see, even because you've had the whole Brexit thing and all that, I could very well see, a Donald Trump facsimile or whatever, a Donald Trump clone happening there. So I could see
Trump light.
Some people say May is exactly that, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I could see something like that happening there. And some Christians getting behind him and some Christians being opposed. So it's a matter of, again, as Eva said, the quote unquote, Americanized Christianity or churchianity, as we've said before. And so that those people back Trump, and then there's other people who are Christians, myself included, who do not support Donald Trump.
Do you think it's more of the loudest Christians are the ones that support him?
I think.
I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
So, nationalism, nationalism, and nationalism is what it is, and it's a conflation or a mixing together of my faith and my country, and
right.
It is history, a made up past that paints us in. I mean, us as in the American. I'm not necessarily. I mean, you could even say Black Americans because we forget our past. Like we're this beacon on the hill to essentially like make the world, like run the world basically. And well, isn't that blessed by God? Like that's what we think that we are. Dan mentioned it earlier that like if people actually read, which they don't, if people actually read the Bible and examined it for themselves, as opposed to the groupthink that goes on,
right? Being told,
then they wouldn't do these things. I mean, this person is the very manifestation of me first. I mean, everything he does has his name on it, like has his name first. He's the
But isn't that how this country is founded?
Exactly.
Our principles, me first.
Exactly. So
he's the most American president.
Yeah, they slapped the Christian thing or the faith thing on there. I mean, we got that from Britain. So
well, that was my other point. Do you think this is like a pot calling the kettle black? With the Brexit thing and those people who were leading that nationalist movement in England about a year ago.
I see. As opposed to like Britain's history.
Yeah.
Right. Both, and.
Both, yeah.
But I'm saying their their recent history is
Theresa May.
Yeah.
I would say that's kind of the point I was making. I'm kind of a lot of what you see there, or what you see here happens there. So a lot of what we get comes from there. So it's kind of for him to act all surprised like that can't happen there. I was saying that very well can happen in Britain. They very well can have a Donald Trump.
I mean, look at the way his denomination was formed. The Anglican Church only exists because Henry VIII couldn't get what he wanted to get from the Catholic Church. I'll just keep it that way to keep it clean. And then now the Anglican Church that this guy, serves under, was formed. So, yeah, I mean, if we look back even a few years, then we'll find all kinds of messiness within our human systems.
Man, again, we started out positive and then negative. So anyway. No, I think, people got to be a little bit more cognizant to their history. I think we kind of can be ignorant to our history and can be very short-sighted, so we can say things like, oh, how could that happen? It's like, how could it happen? Have you not been around? Have you not been around and look around? But at a minimum, I'll just give him credit for at least saying it, on a television show. You know what I mean? I would at least, I can at least appreciate that he would apply some pressure to believers to think like, hey, why do I support this guy? Like, as Avery says, he's me first, which is the complete antithesis. Thank you.
Of one Jesus Christ.
Of one said, Yeshua, Jesus, right?
But it's the complete, what's the word I'm looking for? But it does describe American churchianity.
It embodies, fully. So anyway, believers, as we always conclude our shows as saying is we got to do better, man. We got to do better. At some point, one of these positive stories is going to end positive when we start to dissect it. But as always, we do appreciate you guys for rocking with us. We went a little long this week, but we had 2 weeks of information that we had to let loose on. So as always, I always say, I'm going to keep God in the mix till they put me in the ground. And I appreciate y'all for listening to us one more again. For Avery, Eve, and Dan, this is AJ saying peace.
Peace out.
Peace.
Later.
let's get started. I won't cheat you. Let me set apart who is my people. The ones who set in their heart to be believers. Press on to the mark to follow Jesus. When it gets hard, they be seeking the leaders. Fathers that help them heal when they are beaten, or help them see the meaning when they're grieving. Don't follow their feelings.